intellectual. Hopefully we won't be doing anything that you're going to struggle to understand. This talk is aimed at all ages, so as I say, we're not going to be going into real details and dates and facts, but hopefully it should be accessible for all. So, welcome, first of all, welcome to the Avro Lancaster here at RAF Tailgun. This particular Avro Lancaster is S for sugar. She didn't start off her life as S for sugar, she started off as Q for Queenie. I believe this announcement is just announcing the talk is starting. So we're all okay. As I said, this Lancaster began her life as Q for Queenie and ended her life as S for sugar. Now the reason this Lancaster was preserved while so many were scrapped was because of her quite impressive track record. The average life expectancy of an Avro Lancaster was 21 missions. It was expected that 21 missions was about all they would achieve before being shot down, damaged or destroyed. This particular Avro Lancaster actually managed 137 missions in her lifetime, just during the Second World War, which I'm sure you'll agree is quite an impressive feat. And as we go round the side of the Lancaster today, you will see all of those missions painted up on her side, just up by the cockpit. But first of all, a bit of background to the Lancaster. At the beginning of the Second World War, the RAF was relying on what were called twin-engine bombers. Things like the Vickers Wellington and the Bristol Blenheim. Now, in the late 1930s, these were seen to be very good, very reliable bombers. But as war broke out, the RAF realised that they were already obsolete. The Germans had things like Tailguns and Messerschmitts and Donners were very fast, very agile bombers, and you can see some of those around the museum today. During the Battle of Britain, the Germans decided to target British cities. Now, whether or not this was a deliberate move is debated. Some accounts claim that this was a lone German aircraft who got lost and accidentally dropped his bombs on London. Because of this single move, though, the RAF retaliated by starting to bomb German cities. Now, the issue the RAF had was whilst the Germans had reached London in about an hour flying from France, it was 600 miles to reach Berlin. Aircraft like Wellingtons and Blenheims were stretched to the very, very limits of their range. They could just about get to Berlin and back with the fuel and the ammunition they had, but it was quite good. Now, there's a man called Roy Chadwick who worked for the company Avro. And before the war, they decided something called Avro Manchester. If you saw a photo of the Avro Manchester, you would be forgiven for thinking it was a Lancaster. They looked very, very similar, only they were slightly narrower. Their wings were around 3 foot shorter. And if you look very carefully, you will notice that they have only 2 engines. Twin-engine bomber. Now, the Manchester is very good design. The way they have a very long contrary because of those actual engines, it's struggled to get to the ground. They are struggled to reach Berlin. So, Roy Chadwick back to the war, and then they got Avro Lancaster. Now, it's similar, it's extended the wings, added on to your engine, and actually came up with the RAF best for the war. Now, that was in 1941. The Lancaster didn't fly operationally in 1942. Was such a good design in this production way until the end of the war, finishing production in 1946, and it was actually used by the RAF for various roles right into the 1950s. You also had aircraft like the Halifax and Stirling, came about the same time. They were also a 4-engine bomber designed for similar work. Now, with the Lancaster being designed, you then had a problem. Things like the Wellington didn't need to make crew. The Avro Lancaster needed a crew of 7 minimum. So they had to recruit lots and lots of new people. So conscription started, of course, meaning lots and lots of young men were joining the RAF. And to be in bomber command, you would volunteer. The RAF would never force you to be in bomber command. The reason for this being in bomber command was the most dangerous job you could have in World War II. If you think of all the dangerous jobs you could have, like being in a German submarine, like flying Spitfires back to Britain, none of them were anything compared to bomber command. On average, in bomber command, 3 out of every 5 crew members were killed during the war. They astounding loss rates. So most of the nice set of wings on your uniform. You can boast to everyone about being a pilot. When you go down to the pub, you can impress all the young ladies by saying, yes, I'm a pilot, look at the aircraft I fly around. But being a pilot was a bit tricky to get to. At the beginning of the war, pilots weren't expected to be officers, as were things like navigators and bomb aimers. They were seen as gentlemen's jobs, whereas something like an air gunner was seen as being suited for the lower ranks. Being an air gunner is quite simple. All you have to do is point your guns at the enemy aircraft and shoot. So that was seen as a trade rather than a profession. So you had officers up at the front of the aircraft and your other people, your working classes if you like, down at the back of the aircraft doing the dirty work, exposing themselves to the enemy fire. So an Avro Lancaster needed a 7-man crew. Now usually, if we've got a few younger ones, I'd ask them to suggest what kind of people you might need. But can anyone tell me any of the jobs you think you might need on board a heavy bomber? What do we reckon? Any ideas?
Tail gunner.
Pardon?
Tail gunner.
Okay, we need a tail gunner. Fantastic. So the tail gunner, known as the tail end Charlie, sits at the very back of the aircraft there. Who else might we need? Yep, pilot. Very good. We need someone to actually fly the aircraft. Any other ideas? Navigator. Very good. We need someone to tell us where we are. Who else? Who else might we need on board? Mid-gunner, mid-upper gunner who sits up there, quite an exposed position. So we've got tail gunner, mid-upper gunner, we've got our pilot, we've got our navigator. You would of course have a radio operator or wireless operator who receives messages from base and communicates with the other aircraft. You would have an engineer on board. If anything went wrong on board the aircraft, the engineer would be responsible for fixing it. And finally, I did just mention them, you would have a bomb aimer. I today am portraying a bomb aimer. The bomb aimer lies on their belly at the very front of the aircraft. They also act as a third air gunner whilst they're not over the target, but again, quite an exposed position up at the front of the aircraft. Flying over Berlin, very dangerous. Not only do you have the enemy fire coming from the ground and from night fighters, but the conditions in an Avro Lancaster at 20,000 feet were not very agreeable. So you'd have all kinds of special equipment that you would take with you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at some of the equipment, some of the clothing that might be worn. So first of all, you've got your battle dress blouse that I'm currently wearing. These were introduced in 1942 as a replacement for what was called service dress. Service dress being a very smart uniform that you would wear to go to dances and go out to the pub in. The battle dress blouse was more practical, it was cropped at the waist, you had far better movement to move inside your aircraft. But of course at 20,000 feet it's quite chilly. So you would either wear something called an Irvin suit or a Sidcot suit. Sidcots were made out of canvas, Irvins were made out of leather. This here is an Irvin jacket, and it's your typical flying jacket. You'd wear one of those and potentially matching trousers as well, to keep you nice and warm whilst you're up in the air. That provides you some protection from the cold, but of course if you're going to bail out into the sea, that's going to get very, very wet and it's going to pull you under. Bomber Command used what's called the 1941 pattern Mae West life preserver. During the Battle of Britain, RAF pilots found that it was quite hard to fall into the sea and then inflate your life jacket using your mouth. You just had a single tube running up that you would have to inflate by hand. The Germans had the advantage of having life jackets filled with CO2 automatically. So in 1941, the RAF got a bit annoyed that all their pilots were stealing German equipment, and they introduced a 1941 pattern Mae West life preserver. Now you have what's called Copac pads inside. Those are filled with an inflatable material. Once you put it on, it buttons across your chest, and you'll tie it onto you as well. You want to tie it nice and tightly, because otherwise, when you hit the water, it's going to rise up above your head and you're going to flip upside down, which isn't good for anyone. The other flaw with the earlier design of life jackets, there was no leg straps. As soon as you hit the water, the whole thing rises up around your chest and you can't really move. So the 41 pattern introduced leg straps. They'd be tied between your legs, like so, to stop it rising up. Attached, you had a CO2 canister down here. In this pocket here, you would carry a small mirror called a helograph or helograph. That was designed for reflecting the sun to draw attention to other aircraft that might be there to rescue you. You would have around the side, you would have a torch, and that was battery powered. The battery was included in a waterproof casing. You would have a whistle that could be clipped onto this hole there, so you could call for help. Round your back, you've got a dye marker. You've ripped that strap open, and it will flood the water around with a brightly coloured dye, meaning you're easier to spot from an aircraft up in the air. And if you're flying in the Mediterranean, that dye marker also acts as an anti-shark propellant. So when you're picking up your hand, it's going to be easy to sharks. Handles on the front, nice and strong to make it easier to drag you out of the water if another plane comes to pick you up or you are found by a rescuer. But of course, this wouldn't protect you falling 20,000 feet. So your Lancaster crew needs to take parachutes with them. You had two types of parachutes. There was a seat parachute and you had the observer parachute. Traditionally in the RAF, you had two roles in one aircraft. You were either a pilot or an observer. Pilots flew the aircraft, observers did everything else. When the other roles were introduced, anyone like a tail gunner, bomb aimer, engineer would be issued with an observer harness, whilst pilots would remain as an equal harness. A seat harness looks like this. Now you would wear it the whole flight. Over your shoulders like a rucksack. Clip it together. You have a central strap. Comes down between your legs. And once it's all fastened together, you will see why it's called the seat harness. Because you actually end up sat on your parachute pack. That there's my parachute. The design of the seat for the pilot in Lancaster put a bucket seat with a big hole in the bottom of it, and that actually gives you cushion to sit on. Now the pilot was lucky because they're wearing their parachute all the time. The rest of the crew just wore a harness with clips on the front. Now that meant that if your aircraft went down, you had to go get your parachute pad out of the cupboard, clip it onto the front of you, and then actually exit the aircraft. The pilot could jump straight away, the rest of the crew would actually have to get their parachutes on before they could exit. So you've got your uniform on, you've got your May West life preserver, you've got your parachute. The most important part of a crew's kit, of course, was their flying helmet. This is what's called a C-type flying helmet. Early on you had the B-type. If anyone knows much about the Battle of Britain, you'll know they're the ones with the big ear bits on them. You look quite silly, you look like a Teletubby. The C-type was introduced again in 1942 and was designed to work with modern radio systems. So that would go over your head. You've got your radio receivers, one in each ear, and a wire to plug yourself into the aircraft. Some crew wore goggles, some crew didn't. Personally, I don't have my goggles on. As a bomb aimer, I need a good view of the ground below. The only reason you need goggles is if the perspex gets shot away and otherwise you're exposed to the night air. So you might have goggles to pull down, but you would always need your oxygen mask. If you're flying above 5,000 feet in the air, you are going to need oxygen. So your oxygen mask would come across, clip round the other side, I will show you in a minute. And not only do you have your oxygen supply there, but you've also got your radio mounted inside so you can communicate with the rest of your crew. So if you weren't wearing your oxygen mask, if you wanted to talk, you have to bring it across, say whatever you needed to say, and then release it again. If you're flying above 5,000 feet, you clip it on, and you have a fresh oxygen supply. Now upon bailing out, the first thing crews would do is remove their flying helmet. If you didn't remove your flying helmet, and you tried to jump out of your aircraft, and your radio and your oxygen tube is still plugged in, you're going to find yourself dangling from your aircraft by that oxygen tube at 20,000 feet close to suffocating. Not a very nice way to go. Jumping out of an aircraft without a parachute seems like a very, very bad idea. But it wasn't always the case. The story I'm going to tell you is about a man called Nicholas Alchemy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to head round to the tail gun position. So Nicholas Alchemy was a tail gunner, and he flew several missions over Berlin before this story happened. So if you want to head round to the tail gun position, I will join you in a moment. Okay. So as I said, Nicholas Alcamain was a tail gunner on an Avro Lancaster. And the tail gunners were nicknamed tail end Charlie. It was the most dangerous job on board. You were physically separated from the rest of your crew just by the distance. You were in the most exposed position. If a German night fighter, like that one behind you there, came and tried to attack the Lancaster, they would usually come from behind and from below, coming up at the aircraft like that. Now the tail gunner's job was of course to protect the back of the aircraft, and they had 4 Browning 303 machine guns to do that. Those are 303 rounds. They're fairly small. They're the same calibre that's used in a standard English rifle. So the same thing being fired by troops on the ground at the enemy in the army. Now each of those guns had 1,000 rounds of ammunition. 1,000 rounds of ammunition would only last 2 minutes. So if you do the maths, your tail gun has only got 8 minutes of ammunition to fire. Your average sortie or mission that a Lancaster is flying is lasting between 8 to 10 hours. So you imagine flying 8 to 10 hours into enemy territory and you have only got 8 minutes worth of ammunition that you can shoot. You're going to have to be very, very careful with the ammunition you use, and therefore you would have to wait until the enemy gets incredibly close to you before you try and fire at them. And Nicholas Alcamain was in his tail gun and they were heading back from their mission. They'd already dropped off their bomb load. They were heading back, I believe, from Berlin. Now, as they were approaching the Ruhr area of Germany, they were knocked out of course, possibly by wind, possibly by German fire, and they got a bit lost. Now, they were attacked by German fire from below. I'm not sure whether it was a German night fighter this time, or whether it was a German flak anti-aircraft fire from the ground. But the Lancaster was hit and set fire. Now, as the Lancaster was spiralling down towards the ground, spewing fire, the pilot radioed through to their crew and said, "Everyone bail out." The rest of the crew grabbed their parachutes and exited the aircraft. However, Alcamain found he was stuck. To get out of the tail gunner's position, you had to rotate your turret so it was facing directly backwards, as it is now. You had to lean behind you and open the doors to your turret. You'd have to crawl backwards into the fuselage. You would have to open a cupboard, get out your parachute pack, clip it onto your harness, get back into your turret, rotate your turret one way or the other, open the doors again, and fall backwards out of the aircraft. Nicholas Alcamain made it back into the fuselage of the aircraft. He opened those cupboards door to find his parachute was already burning. He doesn't have a parachute back, but he's flying at 20,000 feet. Now he was faced with a difficult decision here. Does he A, burn to death at 20,000 feet? Or does he B, jump out of the aircraft with a parachute to sure death, but hit the floor and know nothing about it? Nicholas Alcamain decided he would rather splat like a pancake than burn to death at 20,000 feet. So he got back into his turret, rotated it to starboard, leant backwards and fell back into the night sky. According to Nicholas Alcamain, he doesn't remember what happens next. Now the fact that Nicholas Alcamain survived to death is incredible. He fell 20,000 feet, and the next thing he remembered was waking up. Now he didn't wake up and think, oh,
what has happened is it falling from 20,000 feet into a further. Bendy branches and fir trees had slowed him down, and then he landed on the hard snow. 20 yards to his left was open country zone. He immediately landed he checked himself over, found he wasn't quiet. His feet had got a single point of burn He was arrested by the German police in Starbuck.